Good day, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Kwena Mageza, a legal expert from Matrimonial Incorporated, here with some healthy dose to keep you legally woke. On today's episode, we'd like to talk about issues surrounding marriage. We'd like to unpack the different matrimonial property regimes that we have in South Africa. We have different types of marriages in South Africa, being civil marriages, civil unions, and customary marriage. I won't be going into detail with regards to the types of marriages that we have in South Africa. I would like to focus on the matrimonial property regimes that we have in South Africa, being in community of property, out of community of property with accrual, and out of community of property without accrual. It's important to know your matrimonial property regime in order to understand your rights and obligation within the marriage. The first one that we are going to discuss is in community of property. That basically means that the wife and the husband become one for all intents and purposes. It means that they jointly own the assets and the liabilities of the marriage. We're going to discuss the disadvantages and the advantages of being married in community of property. And the disadvantages of being married in community of property basically means that you don't have your own identity apart from your husband. It basically means you cannot buy immovable property without your husband's consent. And the advantages of being married, and the only advantage of being married in community of property, is basically that there is equality within the marriage. It encourages a balance for both legal and financial matters within the relationship. So if one of the spouse is much better, in a better position financially than the other, he's able to assist the other spouse who's not financially as able as he is or she is. That's the only advantage I can think of in terms of a marriage in community of property. The second matrimonial property regime that we'll be discussing is a marriage out of community of property without accrual. And that basically means that the spouse's joint estate is kept separate. So what is yours, and what is mine is mine. The joint estate is completely kept separate from one another. In order to have a marriage out of community of property without accrual, you would have to have a contract before a notary. A notary is not only an attorney, but an attorney who has written the notarial board exam and who's qualified to do such a contract for the spouses. The contract has to be signed by both parties and registered at the deeds office for it to be a legal antenuptial contract. This is done before the marriage, before the signing at Home Affairs, or the lobola negotiations if ever you are entering into a customary marriage. In layman's terms, it basically means what is mine, what is yours, and when the marriage comes to an end, you get to keep what you came with and I get to leave with what I came with. The disadvantage of a marriage out of community of property without accrual is that if one of the spouses is financially stronger than the other, then it becomes a problem when the marriage is dissolved, because the other spouse may walk away with nothing, if not just what they came into the marriage with. So that's the only disadvantage I can think of. But that can be aided in a will, which is going to be our next topic in the next video, where we're going to be discussing all things wills and estates. The advantages of a marriage out of community of property without accrual is that the estate of the spouses is kept completely separate from each other. And at dissolution of the marriage, there is no complication of the spouse wanting property from the other spouse and so forth. Whatever you have from the marriage is what you get to keep, even at the dissolution of the marriage. The third matrimonial property regime that we'll be discussing is a marriage out of community of property with accrual. This basically means that whatever we accrue together within the marriage is what will form part of the joint estate. This basically means, and this kicks in when divorce comes into play. So if the parties are married in community of property with accrual, it means that at the stage of divorce, the matrimonial property with accrual will kick in, and the spouse who has divorced will then have a right to share within the joint estate that was accrued during the subsistence of the marriage. In my opinion, this is like a delayed in community of property, because when the marriage begins, in most instances, people haven't acquired any property. And a marriage with accrual is basically saying what you acquire during the marriage forms part of the joint estate, and that is what you will get to divide at the end of the marriage. So for me, it's almost like a delayed in community of property. And this is why a marriage in community of property and a marriage out of community of property with accrual will have very similar disadvantages, because at the end of the day, it's two joint estates coming together and being divided on behalf of the spouses. The advantages of a marriage out of community of property with accrual is basically the fact that the spouses are both financially protected at the dissolution of the marriage, and they will equally have a share to the accrued estate of the marriage. So it's not a question of which spouse is financially stronger than the other. Each one of them will be protected by law to earn the 50% that they're entitled to of their estate. Through my life journey, I have noticed, and I'm not that old, the prevalence of the stigma surrounding being married out of community of property without accrual. And I know a lot of people, are against it. And if your in-laws ever find out that you're married out of community of property, I know it may not sit well with them, but my thing is, know your rights, know that you're protected by the law, and know that the stigma stems from very little understanding from people. Having unpacked all the matrimonial property regimes, I hope you found this video insightful and empowering. And the reason I am doing these videos is because I have a passion for people, I have a passion for the law, and I know that there is power in knowledge, there is power in information. And we want you to be legally informed, so that you don't only involve the lawyers at the stage of litigation, but at the beginning of marital processes. Before you get into a serious commitment, familiarize yourself with the law, familiarize yourself with the legal part of the marriage. I am Kwena Mageza, Director of Matrimonial Incorporated.